My name is Eddy Benoit Jr., founder and CEO of the Benoit Group, and this is Shape the Deal. We will discuss some of the secrets and strategies in the real estate process that will help you shape your next deal. Welcome to Shape the Deal. My name is Eddy Benoit. I am your host today, joined with my good friends, from New York and also here from our hometown, Atlanta. I have Josh Sasouness from Dwight Capital, who came here early this morning, so I have to be pretty important for you to come here and join me and have this conversation. And also Richard Slaton with Bank of America is going to join us in a conversation about debt financing, which is the third component in shaping the deal. But before we go into that, I'd love for you to share with the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into this business, Josh.
First of all, thank you, Eddy, for having me on. It's really great and thrilled to be here. My brother Adam was working at a mortgage banking firm. He's just a year older than me, grade older than me. And after I graduated, or shortly before, he said, I want you to work with me, so we can do this together. And I said, no, I hate you. I don't want to work with you. I don't want to know you. I hate you. Older brother syndrome. Every two brothers has that same dynamic. And then he actually sat me down. He explained to me the business. And after 2 minutes, I went from one side of the spectrum to the other side.
How long have you been in the business, so far?
About a dozen years.
All right, good.
It feels like 50.
But you're doing great things. I mean, your dozen years equals almost, two and a half times some others. So you obviously have taken this by storm after you said yes to your brother.
It's not just a matter of kind of years, right? It's more so hours, right? And I think that we just put in 50% more hours on any given week than anyone else, and that adds up over time. It
definitely yields results.
Yeah.
Richard, how'd you get into business? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, mine, I went on, I call it a tour, right? So, I was actually exposed to real estate as a teenager.
Okay.
And it was a residential real estate broker in my neighborhood. And, I used to actually go to his office after school when I was in high school. And so I used to learn how to write contracts, understood what a listing agreement was. He used to actually take me on sales calls with him. So by the time I graduated high school, I had a real estate license. I was 18. So really, that was my intent. I had no intention on going to college at all. And so I was a pretty good student in high school. I graduated with the highest math average in my class. And
wow.
So my math teacher talked me into going to Morehouse. And so I went and found out we had a real estate program over there. And so while there, I learned, the finance, the real estate, development and all of that. And even back in those days, there was not a lot of recruiting on HBCU campuses in terms of opportunities in commercial real estate. So what I did was I interviewed with a national bank. They offered me a job in operations. So they wanted me to be a budget analyst in operations. And back in those days, we didn't have email, so I had to wait to get the offer letter in the mail. So once I got the offer letter in the mail, I picked up the phone book, found the commercial real estate department at that bank, ended up talking to the person that became my boss, and I basically leveraged that offer that I had as a budget analyst in operations to get an interview in the commercial real estate department. So I never made it to be a budget analyst, so I started in the real estate department as an analyst and went on to be a lender, and that's how it went. So my career just kind of grew from there. So I did that and went to work for Fulton County government and went to work for a developer, and now doing what I do at B of A.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Not many people have the opportunity that you had in high school to work on the real estate side and ultimately end up on the real estate side. I mean, you've been doing great things, Richard. Been following your career for a while. when it comes to underwriting, that's like that big U word, underwriting, which is so critical. Everybody cringes based on what the outcome, of that is going to look like. And what are some of the key factors that you look for when you're underwriting a deal?
So I would say we're generally, especially if it's just a stabilized, if it's a regular, if it's a regular property that isn't, that doesn't involve too much construction, right? We're focused on the fundamentals, which are location, price, right? What type of leverage they're looking for, in terms of loan dollars relative to the value, debt service coverage ratio, right? So the kind of how much cash flow there's going to be, and then more of a secondary point. Definitely still very important, but more secondary is sponsorship.
Right. As far as who the borrower is.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, who the borrower is, right. But we're for stabilized properties, generally a lot more focused on the asset itself, the deal itself, than the sponsor.
How about you, Richard?
It's interesting what Josh said, because I tend to look at it in reverse. So in other words, I'll look at the sponsor first.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's probably a difference. I think that's a major difference between a big commercial bank and a non-bank lender.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. Yeah. So what I would do is I'd look at the sponsor, i.e. developer, i.e. borrower, which are all the same folks. So I want to look at what their financial statements look like, what kind of experience they have, what kind of track record they have, what their reputation is in the marketplace. So once I get through all of that, then I look at the deal itself. And by the time I get to looking at the deal itself, then, kind of like Josh, I'm looking at the location. I'm looking at the numbers on the deal, looking at the assumptions that they're putting into their numbers to see if they actually make sense. And then, I'm looking at that debt coverage ratio. I'm looking at that, loan to value. And as a bank, I'm on the debt side, I'm doing the construction loan. So what I'm looking for also is who's going to be my takeout, meaning who's going to pay me off once you finish developing this property, or if it's a rehab project, when you completely get it renovated, who's going to take me out? So it may be, somebody like Josh to come in and provide that permanent financing to pay off my, 18 to 30 month construction loan. So I look at it in the, from those tiers.
Yes, it's really interesting as far as, the approach and underwriting the deal. At the same time, you're still requiring the same things, because I've seen the same requests from both sides, on the deals. As far as and what people don't realize is all the information that you have to submit. And you have to make sure that you're prepared, that your accounting is in order, your audits are in order. You can't submit unaudited financials. You have to have personal financial statements, if there are guarantees that you have to put up. And so what's always interesting is that, from a developer standpoint, especially the younger developers, they put performance together and they're like, this will work great. We can make all this money. And then we'll sell it in 3 years and make a 3x, a 3 multiplier on the investment that we made. But at the same time, they don't realize all of the requirements that are going to come in play.
Well, I think it's important to note that, people think that you can get involved in real estate and you can just start running day one. You can't do that, right? You got to crawl before you walk. You got to walk before you run.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
most people like to run real quickly.
Right.
They like the running part.
It's a marathon,
that's
not
right.
a sprint. Yeah.
and that's the kind of the balance, right? The simpler the transaction, the less, sponsorship, ownership is going to matter, right? And as you get more complicated, the more sponsorship, ownership matters, right?
That's right.
I think that's and people who get involved in real estate need to understand that they need to focus on, simple deals. Build your foundation with simple deals.
At what point does that borrower's personality, character, reputation come in play when you're going through your underwriting
For
process?
me, it's day one.
Okay.
It's day one because, that's one of those C's, what we call the 4 C's of credit is character, and that's vitally important. So when I'm looking at a borrower, I'm looking at the financial statement. So obviously I want to see a certain liquidity, meaning they have to have a certain degree of cash on hand. Yeah. I want to see that they have a certain net worth, which will be you want your assets to exceed your liabilities, and you want that number to be positive, right? Yes. And then you want to. We look at what we call contingent liabilities. So in other words, what else do you have going on that's due in the near term? So I look at all those, but then the character part comes in is, kind of what you were just talking about. In bad times, how do you behave? I mean, are you gonna hand me back the keys and walk away from the deal, or are we gonna truly be partners and work through the hard times, because they happen? And so when you can establish that, that's when you have a true relationship. And to me, even working for a national bank, you want to work with developers that is just not a transaction, it's a relationship, and that personality and that character play an important part, right? So in my space, with affordable housing, for example, when we doing a deal, it's, we married to you for 15 years.
That's right.
So that character thing is vital.
That survives most marriages.
Exactly right.
In today's day. But it's interesting you talk, before I go to you, Josh, you talk about the financials as far as their capital, their financial statements, their liquidity, the whole nine. But most of these younger developers are like, they believe in OPM. They believe using other people's money. So everything is a matter of, I'll just do a capital raise for my project. Well, how much money do you have? Well, I don't have much money. How's your credit? I have some issues that I have to, work through on my credit, but I have this great deal here, and basically I want to lead this deal, and I'm going to do a fundraise for the capital. Either I use friends and family, country club money, or get some family office to back me on this first project that I'm doing as a new construction, as you alluded to earlier, Josh.
Right, so I would just say, first of all, in your example that you just mentioned in terms of raising money, OPM, right, other people's money, if you don't have the financials, you don't have the balance sheet, you don't have the experience, and if anything, your financial history is not looking very good, you got to partner up with someone who's the opposite, right? And there's no other way to go about it. You need to partner up with a credit-worthy individual to make the mortgage credit, the sponsorship, the ownership of the deal look very strong, which entails that partner signing on docs, right? Which is
they've got to sign on a dotted line for the guarantees, but
right.
And then there's the ego factor. Yeah, the ego factor is that I don't want to relinquish the control on this first deal because it's my deal. I found it, and I've thought of the whole master plan. Been working on it for 3 years, and now here comes this lender telling me that I need a sponsor to actually come in and bring me more horsepower, but I don't want to relinquish the deal because in order for me to get that horsepower, that sponsor, or co-guarantor is going to want more control of the project, more percentage ownership.
Take that ego, put it in your basement, right? Exactly. And triple lock that door. Exactly. Because egos aren't going to get you anywhere. They're only going to get you in trouble.
It gets you in a lot of trouble. Yeah. Right? We tell a lot of our associates here at the company, please leave your ego in the parking lot. You can pick it back up on the way out.
Exactly.
So definitely don't bring it back during lunchtime.
And that includes business. that includes business owners too.
That's right.
Right.
That's
no one wants, especially in 2021, 2022. Yeah. Having an ego is more or less illegal these days, right? And even for ownership of real estate firms, lenders, executives, right? It's more of a meritocracy than ever, right? It's more of a flat environment than ever.
That's true. Yeah. If you ever had a chance to look back at a deal that you misanalyzed, and the deal just a couple of years later, you're driving by or you hear about the deal and it was extremely successful.
I had that experience, and I'm not gonna say the deal specifically, but honestly, I saw the deal about 6 years ago. I passed on it because I felt like the timing in the market wasn't there yet, and the product that they were developing, it was untested in the market. So, me being risk adverse, right, and that's just from my credit training and all that, I'm very risk adverse. So, they were able to get the deal done, and it's actually a deal in the West End. So they were able to get that deal done, and it was very successful. Matter of fact, it was the first condo project in the West End, and so it's been very successful. Yeah. And they're doing well. And
I thought you were going to talk about the name.
I didn't talk about.
I know the project because I happen to live here, and I know West End.
So I hey, it sometimes it's like that, and I kind of look at it like, what. Nobody knows it all in this business. I mean, and that's why you have to have a collaboration of people, have relationships with people, because nobody knows it all. And and you learn from that kind of thing and say, if the next time that happens, I'll probably take a different approach.
I tell you, Richard, for me, I feel as though every time we get a no from a lender, they misanalyze our deal. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, but it's different because you guys, you've been in the game for 3 decades, right?
Yes.
You know what you're doing, right? So it's very likely that the lender is misanalyzing your deal. But I would say, yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of deals that we've worked on that have ended up, that we've passed on and have ended up being successful. Mm-hmm. And I attribute that to a number of things. I mean, we either misanalyzed it, which I think is very important for owners, for sponsors, to make sure that they're reaching out to a plethora, to a number of lenders and brokers, mm-hmm. right? Because lenders and brokers are people, mm-hmm. right? They're going to miss things. They're not going to see things the way you will, right? That's why you got to make sure you're working with a number of them. There are times where people just got lucky, right? The market is moving very strong in that direction, and the deal doesn't pencil at the moment in time that we're underwriting it. Lo and behold, by the time it's mid-construction, suddenly it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
True. But you're going through a different economic cycle.
Yeah, but
market changes.
Yeah.
You can forecast that a little bit as a developer, right?
Yes.
And maybe smaller markets, sub-markets better than the lender, especially a national lender would, right? Because mm-hmm. you're there locally.
And also, let me add to Josh's point too, because it could be a case where the deal was not necessarily misanalyzed, but it could be a case the deal didn't happen because of the appetite of the lender.
Right. At that time.
Didn't
you were maybe oversubscribed
right.
Exactly.
on a projects like that.
Exactly.
Right.
So those cases do happen.
If it's a new construction deal, it's like we kind of hit our quota for new construction, mm-hmm. and maybe a good deal, but we can't. We already have too much risk for that type of paper, for those type of loans. That's a good point, Richard.
Yeah.
And Dwight, we've looked at deals, especially some refinancing opportunities, and at the time we were looking at them, it just didn't make sense, even though that's what we wanted to do. We thought it was the right time to pursue that refinancing structure. We looked at it and we're like, you know what? We're really trying to push the envelope here. And 6, 7, 8 months later, markets change, rates are different and whatnot, and properties performing a lot better, rents are higher. You're in a new fiscal year, and the deal just is ripe. Yeah. For a refinance, and we've moved forward. But what is interesting is the fact that we are able, as two professionals from the lending side, from the borrower side, sit down and think through and say, this is really not the right time to push mm-hmm. this. Mm-hmm. And that is very critical. And also listen, to the lender. No, you don't want to do this now. If you really want to do it, okay, but it's not gonna yield what you're expecting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, but if we wait, things could improve, or they could stay flat, or not improve.
Yeah, and you know what? There's been plenty of times where we've looked at deals, and they didn't work. 6 months later, they did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's also been plenty of times where we didn't think deal was super strong or that it made 100% sense. But we've closed a dozen deals with that owner before. There's history, trust, credit that's been developed between us and that owner.
Absolutely.
And we stretched, right? And when I say stretch, that's not, I don't use that word liberally. I'm not, it's not something that we do often. But we do it, right? For owners and developers who we have a strong track record with.
That's what they care.
Yeah, you underwriting the borrower,
right?
Not always the deal.
Right.
That's right.
Okay, because at the end of the day, if things, if there are issues down the road, you have to deal with the person.
And on the flip side of things, we can have a sponsor who's very qualified. We've done many transactions with, right? They bring us a deal that makes sense, right? It's not necessarily a home run, but it's a double, right? And we won't want to do it because of the sponsor's character.
Yeah.
We just don't want to deal with him, right? We just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
Because we know exactly, based on your point, that if the deal goes sideways, he's going to be very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
And these days, and I think not these days in general, and I think every marginal year you grow older, you understand this better, is time is the only commodity more valuable than cash.
That's true. That's true.
Right, and you don't want to waste time.
Yeah,
right.
and I'll add to what Josh said, because I think he is 1,000% on, and that's a great point. But to me, what I've seen over these last 16 months or so during this pandemic, underwriting guidelines are they're somewhat fluid. So everybody's learning kind of as they go. They're adjusting to economic conditions. I mean, you talk about supply chain issues being one, for example, that weigh in on what is how long or how much it's gonna cost to get building materials, lumber, steel, all of that kind of stuff. And so to me, the relationship piece come in, and how you work with your borrower is those things are constantly changing, and you have to have a great relationship with the borrower and be able to have that communication with them to say, hey, look, at the end of the day, the bank is in the business of mitigating risk. And, these, if we looking at lumber and it's up 250%, how do we mitigate that risk, and how do we work together to mitigate that risk? And so, and you can kind of see early on, especially during this pandemic, how that relationship is gonna evolve, because if even that piece gets contentious here on the front end, that's a red flag.
What were some of the telling signs, in a deal that you've underwritten or were part of that actually, had to go through a deed in lieu of foreclosure or fully, foreclosed? Or you go back after the deal is underwater and you're like, you know what? I saw these red flags, but I chose to ignore them.
See, the latter's happened to me more than the former. Okay. So, because when I'm in the middle of analyzing a deal and underwriting a deal, I'm looking at what their assumptions are, and I may have a market study, a third party appraisal, and I'm kind of regressing what those two documents are saying to these assumptions, and I'm just looking for those telltale signs of how far off the mark each one is, or are they in the same vicinity, and do the assumptions make sense? And local market knowledge is important, right? And so to me, real estate is a local market business. Right. So you have to understand the market dynamics. And so looking at a deal, if I see things that are kind of far out of market norms, that's kind of a red flag for me. But in my experience, when I fortunately have never had anything foreclosed. I've had stuff I had to work out, but I always go back to those few things I saw up front, like that, they may have had the rents too high, or something like that.
Gosh.
We're not going to compromise on fundamentals, deal fundamentals, right? So that's generally always a standard for us, as I had mentioned before. Mm-hmm. The red flags start popping up when, the borrower's telling you, after you close or before you close, in that area, shortly before or shortly after, the borrower's telling you things, and then you get the financial statements, and what he's saying isn't what's showing up on the statements, and then you're like, let's keep an eye on that.
Uh-huh.
And then it continues for another month, and it's like, okay, this is going to be a problem, right? And we've had one situation in particular where, it was a big loan. It was about a $40-50 million portfolio in San Antonio, and the sponsor just couldn't get it together. I mean, we gave him all the outs in the world, and he couldn't get it together. And I think it just came down to character, right? He just didn't care. He had inherited the properties, didn't understand and operate them, didn't want to take direction from us as a lender and almost his partner at that point. And then at some point, we just had to, put him into default, and we actually we don't foreclose because we don't want that MO as a lender, so we sell the note off to another firm.
Yeah, it is
who's more professional at dealing with those type of situations.
I get it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just a lot of borrowers, a lot of developers, young, experienced. A lot of times they really need to understand where they fit, in the overall development process. Are you a deal maker? Or are you a deal manager? Or are you a deal broker? Or are you a deal junkie? You just like deals. You go deals after deals. And a lot of people in this business that just love deals, but they don't fit, every one of those categories that I mentioned, in which we could talk all day about as far as, what each one of them entails.
Before you digress, when it comes to what's a good fit for you, I think that the most important thing to understand is you need to focus on your strengths. Right? So whatever your strengths are, whatever role that entails, do that role, right? And focus on that role, focus on your strengths, passively work on your weaknesses, right? Yeah. And then after a year, 2 years, 5 years, you see that you've evolved, and then take on another role.
That's
right? Mm-hmm. You don't need to hit a home run.
Yeah, that's
get
true.
the right
One.
partners.
I agree.
Get the right partners.
Get the right role for yourself.
Right.
Get the right partners accordingly, and then evolve. Right? Life it's a long road.
And sometimes walking on the project is good too. You save money.
Ichiro Suzuki over Adam Dunn for me all day long. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. What are your thoughts relative to the issue that we're dealing with? Especially it's been around for a long time, but even more prevalent today as it relates to the disparity in the lending opportunities for minority-owned companies, women-owned, companies, or even mostly African-American companies that are, seeking, loans for development projects, refinances, and whatnot, as far as the different requirements that they have to go through relative to others.
Well, I think historically, that those have been kind of some challenging areas, if you will. But I do believe that there is a concerted effort, by many financial institutions to try to bridge that gap, because that directly speaks to the wealth divide, in my opinion, in this country. And so I think, the financial industry as a whole, I mean, even if you just look at, a lot of these firms have, initiatives geared toward, minority-owned businesses. Or developers. So you're starting to see that being addressed, in this market. But historically it's been a problem. But I think the financial industry is trying to address it.
Okay. Agreed. I think that organically, the problem is being fixed. I think if you look at, decade after decade after decade, I think the situation for minorities and for women become way better than the decade prior, right? But you need to look at the situation realistically, and you want to help, right? You want to do what you can. So it's on both sides. I think that on the lender, on the banker side, on the broker side, right? You have to have the conversation, right? You need to talk about these things and make sure that, the conversation is continuing, right? That's our job, to make sure that it's continuing. At the same time, on the minority, women's side of things, you need to understand that you're coming in at a disadvantage, right? And again, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller every decade. And you need to compensate accordingly. You need to look at the situation realistically. You need to compensate accordingly by making sure you present yourself really well, more so than someone else might have to. Because that's just the reality of the situation, right? Yeah. But the good news is I do think that it's getting, greater and greater every year, particularly the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
More than ever.
Yes, and over the past 3 decades, whether I was working for a company or in business, for myself in partnership, I believe we've done at least a couple of $1 billion in financing, on projects and greater. And I've seen, as a business owner, some of the challenges relative to financing, but we've still been able to get financing. And so therefore, we want to make sure that every time we present a deal to a lender, we are dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and dotting the J's. Mm-hmm. You can't come unprepared, and also know that there could be, just some, you may be at a disadvantage from a competitive standpoint, and you can't change that at that time. But what you can change and what you can affect is how you present your deal and how you present yourself. As you talked about, those 3 C's that you deal with as it relates to any borrower. Then at that point, you're not dealing with race or gender anymore.
Exactly.
And that's how you get a fair share, a fair opportunity, to get your deals financed.
And also what I would, kind of say is, if I'm a new developer, right, long before I even have a deal, I would start building relationships with some bankers in my community, get to know them, let them get to know me. And when that deal does present itself, it be more of an easier transition to move ahead, because you've put that time in before the banker even ever see a deal.
So it doesn't happen overnight?
Doesn't happen overnight.
Right. That's a great segue into some of the takeaways as we wrap up, this episode on debt financing. As you mentioned, getting to know the lenders in your community, establishing relationships there. What else would you give as a takeaway, to our audience?
All right, so building those relationships, building your balance sheet, meaning keep your debt low, start saving and investing some cash.
Yes.
Always be a student of your craft, and look for deals.
There you go.
Those would be the 4 things.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Josh.
I don't know if there's anything to add to that. It's the fundamentals.
Yeah.
It's the fundamentals, as Richard was saying. So I think, echo everything that Richard just said. And then on top of that, just make sure that every decision you make, everything you do, you take 1 step forward, right? You write 1 word of an email. Make sure everything you do is geared towards the long term.
That's right.
Short term is irrelevant. Every decision, everything you do has got to be 20 years down the road in mind.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's well said.
I agree.
Well said, guys. There's nothing to add to that. You hit it right on the nail. This has been a great conversation. I know we can sit here and talk all day about financing, but at the same time, I hope we've had an opportunity to share some good nuggets, with the audience. And I'm so happy that you guys took the time to join me today on this show and help some of our audience here shape their next deal.
No, thanks
Thank
for
you
having
guys.
us,
It's
Eddie.
been great, man.